So over the weekend, it was announced by China and Iran. Their two foreign ministers were together in Tehran, a $400 billion deal. That's over 25 years aimed at Iran's infrastructure. But I think the bigger point to make here is that China is unilaterally making this deal. They were part of the initial countries, the P5+1, that put together that nuclear deal with Iran, that are agreeing with Iran that there should be no negotiations with the United States or the Biden administration until all sanctions on Iran are lifted. It's also a play by China to see if secondary sanctions, so to say that they're going to be doing this oil business with Iran and that which would kick in sanctions against you, will those even be enforced against China? And how would they be enforced? Unilaterally by the United States or even globally by the United Nations? Is there the stomach to do that? So this is another major move by China to establish itself on the world stage, even going so far as to say that they would host negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians.
Yeah, this is the Chinese government, again, the Chinese Communist Party, to be clear, making a play for dominance now in the Middle East. Now, $400 billion is a lot of money, but it's not enough, if we're going to talk about the economics of this, to undo the disastrous economy that Iran is, but they also agreed to buy their oil. That changes the equation significantly. So we're going to get into this in great length because this shows you another play by China. It's an undercutting of U.S. interests, trying to put the United States on the sideline. And then the question is the Biden administration's reaction to this. I mean, why in the world would the Chinese go back into, Wes, let me ask you this, Wes Smith's here. Why would the Chinese go back into the joint, the JCPOA?
Yeah, well,
they want.
Yeah, exactly. They're the great disruptor, and their intentions, are always doubted as well. What this does, Jay, is it provides funds to Iran so they can keep exporting terrorism and supporting their proxies. Now, these funds are supposed to be going towards technology, infrastructure, and what have you. But we all know that Iran has a bad past record of how they use funds that were designated for something else. And of course, funds are fungible. They can use them whatever they want to. But here's the two main things that concern me about it, Jay, and that is it undercuts Iran, the U.S.'s attempts to keep Iran isolated in order to get them to negotiate and to keep them from acquiring a nuclear weapon.
It's an anti-U.S. policy. We'll get into the details of this coming up in the broadcast. I just want to give everybody a sense.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, if you want to talk to us there, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Rick Rennell will be joining us in the next segment to talk about this deal between Iran and China, what it means for the U.S., what it means for the Biden administration, and, of course, the Middle East. A new play by China to assert its power on the global stage. And again, to me, it backs up what we heard from President Biden in his first press conference, was that China expressed to him very clearly that they were making a play to become the world's superpower. So we'll talk about all of that. We'll be right back. And this is a new announcement by China and Iran, a deal that China has brokered unilaterally with Iran. It's $400 billion over 25 years aimed at infrastructure, but it's also a deal to buy Iranian oil. Rick Rennell's joining us now, our senior advisor for foreign policy and national security. Hey, Rick, just right off the bat, it's another move. It's one after another. We also saw a lot of military aircraft this weekend heading towards Taiwan by China, and the greatest display yet of their air power there. But so all around the world, making these deals right in the face of the United States.
Look, it's so outrageous because we've got the entire Democratic Party screaming about Russia. And make no mistake, Russia's a problem, but China is a crisis. It's a growing crisis. And so, well, all of these politicians in D.C. keep saying, look over there, look at Russia, look at that. China loves it. And that's the Beijing line, is to say, look at Russia. We have to be very clear about what this deal between China and Iran means. It means that China is going to be funding terrorism. This regime in Iran is a regime that has been caught funding terrorism even after they signed the JCPOA. We caught them in Europe. The Europeans need to understand that this is a regime that has been funding terrorism on their soil. So let's be very clear about this. Engagement idea is what China wants because they just want to sell products. They don't care if it's if they're selling to terrorists.
It also seemed to me, Rick, I see the foreign minister of China in these interviews. A lot more slick foreign policy wise, a lot more confident foreign policy. I mean, the statements they're making in agreement with Iran, like the U.S. needs to give up all of its sanctions unilaterally, and so now Iran has a partner in this move to say, yeah, the U.S. if you're gonna even sit down at the table with them, they've got to give up all their sanctions. And then part two of this, it seems like China is supplanting Russia in the Middle East. That this is a much bigger superpower with a lot more money to throw around. And he's not just going to Iran, but he's going to go through the Gulf states as well, I'm sure, to try and undermine what was done in the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, it's clear that China is becoming more brazen. It's almost like they think that the United States is weakened right now and that they can stand up and say really outrageous statements, cut outrageous deals, and get away with it. And I think the reality is that they can. We have a team that wants to engage with China, and we have to be clear about this. Engagement is a good thing, and sometimes engagement works, but engagement is a tactic. It's not the goal. And I'm concerned that for Joe Biden, engagement is the goal. Having a meeting is the goal. They keep celebrating the idea that we're going to sit down and talk. That doesn't produce anything. That's a tactic to get us somewhere. But the big meat of the discussion is, what are you going to do when you sit at the table, and how are you going to get the Chinese to back down and not be funding terrorism with this Iranian regime?
Which is really, Rick, of course, what they're doing. It's $400 million, so they're going to fund that to China. The money, as we said, is fungible, so they can then move it to other sources. I cannot believe that the Chinese government would have done this if you and the previous administration were still in power, because the risk factor with the U.S. would be so great. But here, like you said, the desire to engage is so paramount to the Biden administration that I'm sure the Chinese made the calculus and said they're not going to do anything. They're not going to say, hey, gee, you're giving them $400 billion. That might impact the sanctions we've had on them.
Well, I can tell you what the Chinese do is they go to the Europeans and they say, hey, let's just talk. We should all sit down and talk, and let's have consensus. And the Europeans love that. By the way, Germany, the largest economy in all of Europe, is desperate to start trading with Iran. So you've got a sympathetic ear in Chancellor Merkel to engage and start selling products to Iran. But let's be clear. Let's play the European game. Let's play the Western Alliance game. This Iranian regime pushes gay people off buildings. They systematically are human rights abusers. They deny their own people to be on social media talking freely and criticizing their government, but they're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on social media as VIP leaders, as the elites, but they deny their people basic human rights on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I'll add to that list, and you know this because you helped us work on the resolution in this, they have jailed American or dual citizens, Iranian American citizens, or American citizens that have Iranian origin that were in Iran starting churches, and put them in jail with impunity. And, you know, to get them out under your administration was a lot easier than, let me just say, the predecessor to your administration, which was near and we did get them out, but it took 4 years. But you're right, systematic human rights abuser. But yet, you know, it fascinates me. I'm going to ask Wes this from a military standpoint. The military alliance here also makes me a bit nervous. I want Rick's comment on that too, but just the idea of because where we've been in other parts of the world, especially in Africa, Chinese influence is huge.
It is huge. And out of this 18-page draft of this agreement that was released to the media or leaked to the media, some of the most disconcerting things about it from a military standpoint is that a part of this agreement with Iran and China states that starting now, they will begin military cooperation with each other that includes, Jay, joint training, research, weapons development, and also intelligence sharing. It could not be
anything good coming out of that. I mean, I can't imagine.
No, and it's also, Rick, there's a secondary part of this, which is secondary sanctions. Also, is the idea that you're not supposed to be able to purchase this Iranian oil or trade in the Iranian oil, but is anyone going to step up and enforce those sanctions on China?
Good point, and the answer is no. No one's going to step up because they're trying to get us to even drop the original sanctions. There's a piece of good news here, though. I want to highlight, in that now that China has come out completely in line with the Iranian regime, there are a whole bunch of Arab allies of the United States who see this as a terrible thing. And I think it's going to cause Arab allies to question whether or not they should be doing any business with China.
Mm-hmm.
China has come out swinging now for Iran, and that's going to mean a whole bunch of Sunnis who are not happy.
Right. You know, it's interesting. We got an interesting call on that very point.
Yeah, Paul calling from Missouri, line 1. Hey, Paul.
Hello, guys. I was just curious, with all the genocide taking place in China against Muslims, how does Iran justify even working with China? I don't get it.
They're playing chess. I mean, they're looking, Rick, a lot of moves down the board here. So the fact is
Let's be very clear. The Iranian people, we have to make clear, are amazing people. They have a culture that's highly educated. They have a welcoming culture. And this Iranian regime has ruined that reputation for, I think, a very long time. And the Iranian people want to get rid of this Iranian regime because they want to get their reputation back.
Mm. You know, we only have. Well, go ahead, Jordan. You have no follow up.
Go ahead.
Got one last question on this because I think it's important. You know, we've talked about the influence of China here domestically, Rick, and these Confucius centers that are now becoming. Tennessee, by the way, they've cut the funding. They're not allowing funding to the state university. So the governor here in Tennessee took some action. But you know, we've got a federal lawsuit that you're aware of that we filed against your old agency. The United States Office of Director of National Intelligence, U.S. Department of State, and the National Security Agency. We're adding the FBI to this. It goes back to the Eric Swalwell matter. But people need to understand that the Chinese government, through their espionage, has reached into the highest level of government, including putting people in congressional offices when that person is on the Intelligence Committee, and still is.
Look, I hope people understand that they need to support ACLJ in these lawsuits, because this is how we're going to bring about truth and we're going to push back. But it's very clear that over the last couple of years, China has decided that spying and getting access to our local, state, federal politicians is their strategy. They have been successful at it. They have infiltrated our educational system and our political system. We've had to hold defensive briefings with members of Congress, governors, and other elected officials to tell them what they're trapped in many times. Sometimes they had no idea what was going on, and other times they try to justify their behavior. So it's a scandal, it's a crisis, and we certainly need to call it out and be transparent about the money in our schools coming straight from China.
We're going to be getting into that in great length. We're going to continue to do that. In fact, I'm thinking about issuing state FOIAs in various universities and find out what kind of funds are being utilized. There's ways to do that.
Yeah, and people are not. I mean, this is one of the issues going on, is that was being done by the Trump administration. Now it's not. I mean,
Yep.
It was all a policy. That's why Tennessee's governor had to take action.
We're gonna help that. Right, Rick, we appreciate it as always. And let me encourage everyone to do what Rick just said, and that is support the work of the ACLJ. ACLJ.org. That's ACLJ.org. Any amount you donate, of course, is tax deductible, but it also is matched. ACLJ.org. Back with more in a moment.
Updating you on this new deal between Iran and China. It's a long-term deal. So forward-thinking 25 years. And I think what you are starting to see on the world stage is the sophistication of the Chinese foreign policy effort, what they're putting in place to become as their goal, the world leader, kind of the new superpower to supplant the United States, which also encourages a form of government which is, again, kind of antithetical to everything we believe in the United States of America, the idea of representative democracy or freedom of speech, the ability to make decisions for yourself. It is a totally different worldview. It is a worldview that puts the country before individual liberties and individual freedoms. And in China's case, it's a political party. In Iran's case, it's an Ayatollah. But you see how these bad actors will easily work together with each other and put all the things that you would think would be make them different or supplant And I think it also just shows the weakness of Russia.
Yeah, but they're viewing. I think they're
Russia try to puts on these displays in the Arctic. They've got their submarines, but at the end of the day,
they don't have the money.
They're being supplanted in the Middle East because they don't have the cash.
They don't have the cash. So the Russians don't have the financial resources to pull off what the Chinese do. Now, having said that, let me tell you a couple things. We're going to get into exactly what's going on here. And also, as we've been reporting, there has been significant Chinese influence even in the United States, even in the United States government with Congress. And we've talked about that. Well, we've taken it a step further than talk, and we filed a federal lawsuit. Now, we're going to, and that is because of the situation where an agent from the Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party, was very close to Eric Swalwell, congressman, member of the Intelligence Committee. There were other representatives, other high-ranking members of the Senate had infiltration in their offices too. But we filed a lawsuit against 3 government agencies, and now and that includes the U.S. National Security Agency, ODNI, which is Rick Grinnell's old office, the Office of Director of National Intelligence, and the State Department. And, Andy, we're about to add the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
That's right. We want to get to the bottom of what went on with this relationship between Fang Fang, who was a communist Chinese operative, there's no doubt about that, and the lengthy relationship that she had with Congressman Swalwell, and any records of communications with or files regarding the documents in the custody of the NSA, National Security Agency, with a very large array of people in the United States Army, the directors of intelligence and other agencies of the United States with respect to this Fang Fang and exactly what she knew and what she was doing with Swalwell. We knew she was raising money for him.
Yep.
We knew that he was
students in his
placing
office?
students, yes, as interns in the office, and we want to know about it, and we're not going to take no for an answer.
No, we're not. And they have started with their usual answer, which your usual answer is no. And what do? Our response to no is file a lawsuit. Now, Wes, Colonel Smith, you pointed out during the break there was an interesting little trip or meeting between leadership within China and Iran.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that the Trump administration was successful in doing is helping the Gulf states and the Arab nations to understand that we are their ally and their protector and have been for a couple of decades, and that their number one adversary is not Israel but Iran. Now that this agreement between China and Iran is going on, the next schedule for the Chinese foreign minister this week for his trips is to go to the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, those countries, because they, I'm sure, are very, very unhappy with this agreement, because it is really, truly, this word is overused, but it is an existential threat. China and Iran are now together against these nations. The implications, the ramifications of this just can't be overstated. The thing I think about too, Jay, China is our number one national security threat, partly because of their military buildup, the theft of intellectual property, economics, what have you. But now Iran was number 2. Now, our number one threat, China, and Iran have joined together to take a stand not only against America, but against American influence throughout the Middle East.
It's very interesting you said that. Leanne on Facebook just said, feels like the global power structure is being reset. And Kelly on Facebook said, our government looks so weak on the world stage. And you're both right. And it is a reset, and that reset is dangerous. But here's what we're going to have to do. And this is where it's going to get complicated. Jordan, we got on top of these Confucius centers early because Mike Pompeo, our senior counsel for global affairs, was on and was very familiar with what's going on here in various states now. Governors are taking action. We need to find out what these states in our country and these universities, and find out the tie-in between them and these Confucius centers, or whatever they might be calling them now, because they'll now call them something else. That is going to be something worth finding out.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think what you're going to see is that the Trump administration was putting in place a plan that was going to make this have to be disclosed. And the Biden administration immediately reversed that policy of disclosure. So you're going to have states like Tennessee who could come in and say that their state universities can no longer accept this funding. And by the way, that won't include the private universities. They're taking the money too. But the states will do what they can to kick these off campus in some states. So that's happening in other states as well, are moving forward with this move. But what is going on? How many professors are being bought off by the Chinese government, or having their research funded by the Chinese government, so that in a sense they have an incentive not to speak out or speak up? And so this is again, Chinese putting in place very similar strategies to how the United States operated around the world with during the Cold War, and putting in place again. It's kind of like the media side, the funding the university side. And why don't you see more professors? Why don't you see more experts speaking out against the Chinese? Why does it take politicians? And it's because of the money. The money going right into their pockets.
So one of the things, Andy, we have to look at is you could deal with it on a federal level through FOIA. Then various states have open records acts. And to find out what communications are going on between state universities and these Confucius centers, Chinese, probably won't be the government itself. It's probably these centers. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to have to, look, we got to get, we've talked about this. This open records practice of ours is going to grow exponentially because unfortunately or fortunately, depending how you're looking at it, every day we're coming up with a new one that needs to be looked at. And so we're going to get our teams moving on that because that's a big issue. But that's how you do this. You got to follow the money.
That's right, and there is limitless, it seems, monetary resources among the Chinese to perpetrate the institution of what they hope to be a new international order, no longer led by the United States, which is generally guided, and we have, by principles of democracy, respect for human rights, and adherence to the rule of law. That's not the way the Chinese are looking at it. And there are as you mentioned, each state has an open records law similar to the Federal Freedom of Information Act, which we can use to determine exactly what these so-called cultural centers are at state universities, how they're funded, who's teaching at them, what research is being done, what products are being generated, so that we can know on a state-by-state level exactly what's happening. This is something that can supplement our federal FOIA practice.
And these are ancient cultures. Ancient cultures. We did a big research project on this at our Oxford Center years ago, published a book about this. And if you look at Iran and you look at China, there was the famous Silk Road of commerce. That Silk Road ran from China to Persia.
That's right. This is nothing new. These are not new allies. These are not newly forged relationships. The Chinese and the Persians have had ancient ties. They're now just being re-engendered under the guise of Beijing's ambition to be a global leader of nations that opposes Washington and its allies. And what this shows with Iran, the deal, is increasing confidence and an unapologetic China. In other words, one that refutes American criticism of its internal affairs and presents its own values as a model for others, Jay.
Middle East to the Far East.
They do that to try and make themselves look like the people that they aren't. These are basically street thugs who came to power. The Ayatollah is no one special. Yep. His leaders are literally street thugs.
From the 70s.
Some of the more uneducated people in Iran who are leading Iran now. And they go to their own schools. The Chinese, yes, some of them have been educated in the United States now, but notice they would tout that over being educated anywhere in China, still to this day, or tout being educated anywhere else around the world. But they are street thugs. They are not as they were. So I think they want to talk about these ancient histories. But as Rick said, Rick Rennell said, the Persian idea has been trampled. No one thinks Iran now and thinks Persia history.
Right.
They think religious fanatics, psychotic leadership, and a base of people, which obviously some of them don't disagree with that psychotic leadership. Now, there's a big group that does, but they are not powerful enough to overthrow the government on their own. So they're not that big. And so for how long do we let these kind of people play this culture card that is bogus? And that's a point. That's a figure of the United States.
Claudia asked this, and the answer to this is we'll see. Can we expect some sort of economic retaliation from other nations in the Middle East, or will the Chinese buy them off as well?
We're not going to say. I think that Rick's right about it. I mean, even the sanctions that should ultimately snap in automatically won't be applied the same way to China
because of the United States leadership.
Too much reliance on the trade. Too much reliance in business.
All right, folks, don't forget our matching challenge. That's how we go to court to get the answers to these questions. ACLJ.org. That's also how we bring this broadcast to you each and every day. ACLJ.org. Your gift is doubled. ACLJ.org.